So I should probably reintroduce myself. I'm Lauren Canlish from the University of Manitoba, but I'm here to talk about ArcticNet and the Hudson Bay Iris. I'll give you a brief overview of what ArcticNet is for those who might not know. I know some of you have been involved with ArcticNet for a lot longer than I have been, but for those who haven't and those who don't know, ArcticNet is a network of centers of excellence. Its objective is to be a large collaboration of scientists. We have partners from coast to coast within Canada, and we've got international collaborations. We are about 150 researchers and over 1,000 graduate students, including postdoctoral fellows, research associates, and technicians. We cover 34 different Canadian universities and about 20 different federal and provincial agencies as well as departments, and we collaborate with more than 150 different partner organizations in 14 different other countries. Our main vessel to do our research is the CCGS Amundsen, so the Canadian Coast Guard ship, the Amundsen. It's a icebreaker, and it's been going out into the Arctic since 2003, I believe, was its first year as the Amundsen. Basically, the Amundsen is like a floating laboratory. You can study from the bottom of the ocean, the sediment cores, straight up to the top of the atmosphere. This is just a couple of photos that I have from previous field works that I've done. So it just shows someone sampling some mud from a box core. We deploy equipment on sea ice, so the Amundsen brings us to mobile ice in different environments that we'd normally not be able to get to. And then it's a beam trawl that was done, off the side of the Amundsen. This one specifically was in the Beaufort Sea. However, we have done a lot of research within the Hudson Bay. So this is the cruise tracks from 2007 through to 2014. Most of these were done off the Amundsen, but there was the Pierre Radisson and the de Grozier as well are shown here. So within ArcticNet, there's a significant amount of research done within Hudson Bay, but they go to the same location each year, as you can see by the duplicate points and duplicate transects. So I'm going to move on to what the IRIS is. ArcticNet is conducting an integrated regional impact study on the marine and coastal ecosystems in the Canadian High Arctic and in the Canadian Eastern Arctic and Hudson Bay. So what we're focusing on today is the Hudson Bay Iris. And as you can see from the map, it overlaps with two of the other regions that we've divided the Canadian Arctic up into. What the Iris will become is a published document that will be available online. There's printed copies, and those printed copies will be distributed by ArcticNet to communities and organizations. So 2 of the 4 regions of the Arctic have already published their documents, and we have them here that we can send around for everyone to view and see what will be the end result of the IRIS document. Did you want to send this one that way? So one of the central objectives of ArcticNet is to communicate knowledge and science and to help with strategies and policies directed at climate change and development in the Arctic. So that's our goal of the Hudson Bay Iris. The lead for the Hudson Bay Iris is Dr. David Barber from the University of Manitoba. Unfortunately, he was unable to attend, but we have Zuzu Kuzik here as our co-lead. I'm the coordinator, and we have Jonathan Andrews here as our research assistant. I have the website listed at the bottom of this slide, and a lot of the documentation that we'll present to you is available on the website, and we will update this website as drafts of our chapters become available and as further information becomes available. The Hudson Bay Iris is led by a steering committee, and within our steering committee we have representatives from the Arctic Iris Society, the Kativik Regional Government, Inuit Circumpolar Council Canada, ITK, NTI, Cree Nation Government, Sanikiluaq and Hunters and Trappers, and the Hudson Bay Program. We've defined the Hudson Bay Iris as basically what we're calling the Hudson Bay Complex. So we're including Fox Basin, Hudson Strait, James Bay, and Hudson Bay. And the Hudson Bay Iris will be a marine assessment. So the document will cover coastal issues and the environment as it relates to the marine areas. Our main audience for the IRIS is rights holders and stakeholders around the Bay, government or governing bodies, communities, industry, researchers, and really it's for everyone who's interested in the Bay, anyone who has any kind of interest or development in the Bay or lives in the Bay. Some of our goals is to create a document to summarize in plain language what is known about the state of the environment, as well as what is known about the impacts of climate change and the impacts of other human activities. We want to identify key data gaps, and we want to make recommendations back to the public.
Susan, your hair is just slightly on the screen.
Pardon me?
Just slightly on the screen.
Oops, sorry.
Where we're collecting this information from, or our information sources, is from published scientific papers and reports. We're using compiled works such as Voices from the Bay. We're looking at reports from IISD, Oceans North, and other NGOs. We're getting inputs from other regional research centers. We're getting information provided by communities, regional governments, and organizations. And we're going to have initial results from current and ongoing projects, such as the BASIS project that you heard about yesterday. Zeus is now going to talk about the details within our Hudson Bay Iris. Did you want to switch?
Probably we should switch sheets here, sorry. Hi there. I'm not sure if Lauren may have mentioned this, maybe I missed it. We're really in the middle of a really big task. You know, it's been started a few years ago, but we've got a ways to go yet. And it's been the kind of thing that has evolved also as we go along here. So we're making progress on this task, but it's also something that hasn't been a straight line path. It's been a little bit winding. And so what's on this slide is the overview of the chapters that are either written or written in first draft form or outlined or are works in progress right now. And we fully expect that this is going to be a really iterative process. So as a coordinating author puts together one of these chapters and sends it around to people for review, then there will be probably a whole next phase of work where that chapter will undergo a whole big stage of revision, and then we'll get to another version that then can undergo comment. So this is what our chapter structure looks like right now and what people are really working on. But again, it's going to be sort of evolving as we go. And as the chapters get to a stage where they're ready for some review, they're going up onto the website. They're going to the steering committee first, whoever we can rope in to review them, and also sort of other scientists, other technical people. So whoever is interested and able to review the chapters, that's when they're ready in draft form, they go out and get reviewed, and then we'll rework them and come back to it. So this is, I'll just walk through a little bit. It's a long list that's on here. Right now, I guess we have 12 chapters, and then a section that is really either a summary or a synthesis and some recommendations. And I'll say more on that in a bit. So the first chapter is really an introduction. The IRIS aims to take the science and really focus on but translate it into something that's useful for people. So the introduction is attempting to set that stage by introducing the reader to the communities and the people of Hudson Bay, to give some kind of an overview of what we've been hearing hearing about in the last couple of days about the complexities of basically the governance structure and the complexities there. What are the organizations that are involved? Some kind of an introduction to the main socioeconomic activities and the main development activities that have occurred or are occurring in the Bay. I think for this region, it's important that we try to have an overview of this stewardship effort that has been ongoing. As Joel talked yesterday, there's been a long-term effort to get beyond all of the jurisdictional issues and come up with a larger sort of stewardship coordination effort. So there needs to be some kind of a description of that to set the stage for maybe what might be a future direction. And then the introduction would also say something about the scope of the information that's used in this report and the limitations. Again, we're synthesizing work that has been done, in particular in the last decade or so, because that work isn't brought together in any other kind of document. So of course there are going to be some limitations, and it may turn out that a big outcome of this document might be a list of future things that really need to be worked on. Now getting into the sort of technical chapters, the way we've broken it up right now to try to write this synthesis is about the first topic is the climate system. This is really about the atmosphere, the ocean, the atmosphere, the ice, and the ocean, and the interactions between those three, which ultimately sort of control the overall kind of climate system. So those three are interacting, and particularly on the large scale in Hudson Bay, the three kind of need to be considered as an interacting sort of unit. So again, I guess in each of these chapters, there's an effort to describe what do we know about it right now? What do we understand about atmosphere, ocean, and sea ice? The way they have been trending, the way they have been evolving, I guess in the case usually 30 years or 50 years, whatever the data set is. What are the projections for the future to the extent that those are available? Similarly, the next topic is about the watershed. So stepping out of the marine environment, but recognizing how important river runoff is to this whole system. This chapter 3 talks about the watershed. So what you might consider the hydroclimate. Precipitation, evaporation, what are the controls on how much river runoff makes it down to Hudson Bay and James Bay. Obviously we can't talk about the river runoff without talking about regulation, hydroelectric regulation. And so then in that context, the document will try to review what was the sort of freshwater regime in the past, sort of before regulation, through the different phases of regulation, and then also, again, try to look to the future and project what might that freshwater regime be 30 years from now, 50 years from now. So there are the atmospheric scientists, climate scientists are making predictions about future rainfall, for instance, future air temperatures. So then the modelers can take that information and say, well, what is that going to mean to the actual amount of river runoff coming into the bay at various points? And I should say that in this chapter, the scientists are trying to look at it from the whole bay perspective, so the sort of big outline that's on this plot, so the entire Hudson Bay, James Bay watershed, and then also take a much more detailed look at the Nelson River watershed and the La Grande system, recognizing that these are the two big systems really that have been impacted and have changed a lot. The next chapter, near and dear to my heart, is really about the marine and the coastal system. This is trying to get at how does the marine and coastal system function in Hudson Bay and James Bay, and how has it changed in recent decades. And at some point, we hope to get to the point of being able to say something intelligent about how is it likely to change under like a warmer climate in the next 30, 50 years, assuming that those projections for, temperature increase are correct. So this would talk about things like what do we understand about the circulation, the exchanges between Hudson Bay and Hudson Strait and Fox Basin, the tides and how the tides behave differently under the ice versus in open water, stratification of the system versus mixing. So we understand somewhat of some aspects of how fresh water influences the system, and it has different influences in different places. So this next bullet I put on there, freshwater marine coupling, basically that's a fancy way of saying that we, as we all understand, when fresh water goes into the marine environment, different things happen, right? They don't always mix. Instead, they can inhibit mixing. And of course, this ties back to everything to do with ice and the ice cover. And the attempt in this chapter is going to be also to summarize what we know within the coastal domain, because it's obviously this coastal domain where the characteristics of Hudson Bay and the impacts are kind of most relevance, I think, for people, for the communities around the bay. Chapters 5 and 6, I've just put them together here because they both, between these two chapters, we'd be trying to describe what is known from scientific studies about the whole marine ecosystem, from the very bottom of it, from the primary producers, whether that's plankton or eelgrass or kelp, all the way up through the whole food chain of fish, shrimp, all the zooplankton in the water column up to seabirds and marine mammals and polar bears. So it's really a massive job, and I guess that's why we've sort of picture splitting this into two chapters. It's pretty arbitrary where you split it because, of course, it's really one big interconnected system there. So again, what we're trying to do there is describe what do we know, what science is available about all of these components, and then what do we understand about the impacts of climate change and these other activities, hydroelectric developments, other changes on this system, and what might it look like in the future, with the predictions that can be made. The next chapter gets a little more maybe esoteric. But yesterday, this topic of methane came up, and I think most people now, when we talk about carbon, we know that carbon is this driver of global climate change and warming. So because we have to recognize that Hudson Bay is tied into the whole bigger system, the whole world, and we need to know what does this system contribute in terms of its carbon footprint, in terms of is it contributing carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, or is it acting to hold on to some of that carbon dioxide? So this is really kind of a chemistry intensive chapter, but it's really important for tying this particular system into the bigger picture. The next chapter is summarizing the state of what we understand, what data we have about contaminants, in particular mercury, throughout all compartments of the ecosystem in Hudson Bay and James Bay. So also the sources and the sinks of mercury. So what is supplying mercury to the system? How important are the rivers? How important is the atmosphere? And then where's that mercury found? How much is in the water? How much is in fish? How much is in different parts of the food web? And if we have the kind of warming down the road that's predicted, what is that likely to do to these contaminant levels? How those changes might be felt. The next chapter is ambitious, but it really will try to take the results that have come out of this ongoing work, basis and other studies, the work that Joel's involved in, that where we're trying to really get specific about fresh water and how has the fresh water distribution and dynamics, how has it been impacted by the hydroelectric regulation and climate change. So looking at those two very much together, since both changes in the ice from warmer conditions also change that whole fresh water. So that kind of gets more specifically, I guess, into really looking at those specific impacts and how we can tease apart how much each impact is contributing to changes that are being observed. Chapter 10 is meant to collect information. What is ongoing and in the works in terms of ecotourism activities, parks, marine protected areas, as we were hearing in the earlier session. So that's very much about just trying to synthesize, bring together into one place all that information, and also collect up any future plans and opportunities. So in one document, hopefully, there'd be this summary that that relates to all of the Hudson Bay complex, James Bay and Hudson Bay. The next chapter is about transportation. This chapter encompasses sort of a variety of things. On the little map there, these are major transportation corridors that have been identified, and so some of the topics in this chapter, it would include a description of the Port of Churchill, the current status, and maybe prospectus for the future. Obviously, community and industrial resupply is a big factor in a lot of the shipping and transportation that occurs. In regions where new parks have been developed, I know there's some concern about cruise ship activity in the future, and a complication with cruise ship activity, is in many places there is very limited bathymetric information. So, that will come into it a bit there. We're also trying to collect up what's been documented about traditional travel routes, because of course, so some of these routes are on the sea ice, of course, the landfast sea ice, and this is also important to try to capture what's known right now about these routes. Then I guess looking to the future in terms of transportation, there are two sides. One side has to do with opportunities. So if there is reduced ice cover, or when there is reduced ice cover, there might be more opportunities for increased shipping. But on the other hand, of course, there might be risks that are associated with that increased shipping. So trying to put those things together in this chapter. Then the final section, which might end up actually being at the front of the document, not at the end. And often in these IRIS documents, this one section gets published as its own little standalone document as well. First of all, it doesn't weigh 10 pounds, so it's a lot more useful in that sense. And it really kind of cuts to the chase. The summary and recommendations is not written by scientists. It's really written by the steering committee, the members of the steering committee. So it's going to be a process, and it's going to make us all really work together and bring together all the different perspectives. It's still intended to kind of take the key findings from each chapter and maybe the key data gaps, and by chewing on those, make some recommendations about whether it's policy recommendations or recommendations for further study, or there can be a whole variety of recommendations. And I thought I would just read an example out of one of the other IRIS documents that's circulating around, so you could have an idea of the kinds of key findings and recommendations that have come out of some of these others. So in this example, it's about Arctic char, and the synthesis of the science led to sort of the finding that in that region, Arctic char, it's an important food resource. It's one of that's really at risk. So among the various food resources, the conclusion was Arctic char there is going to be at risk in the future. And then they talk a little bit about why. In particular, they're concerned that one of the, with the warming that might come about because of climate change, that might not be a good environment then for char. And so there's a little bit more synthesizing why that they think there might be this risk in the future. And then the recommendations are about, in places where there's a particular threat, habitat enhancement and or restocking of Arctic char should be considered. Another recommendation, community-based monitoring of Arctic char populations should be implemented. So these are just some examples of the kinds of recommendations that the other IRISes and the other IRIS steering committees have pulled out. So they're trying to take the scientific findings and then use them as a basis for making recommendations to go to all the various organizations, whether that also potential sources of money, sponsors who could then help make some of these things happen. I'm going to hand over to Jonathan here.
Okay, so I'm just going to take a few moments to talk about some work that I'm taking part in that's going on behind the scenes a little bit. So as Lauren talked about, the region included that's going to be covered in this document includes Fox Basin, Hudson Bay, James Bay, and Hudson Strait, or a good section of Hudson Strait. And I've listed, if you can see the figure, I realize you may not be able to, I've listed the communities that are included within this region, and that's 33 communities, roughly 44,000 people, in 5 major different regions. So I guess what I'm getting at is this is a very broad region, a lot of variability from a physical standpoint in the marine ecosystems, and also a lot of variability from a people standpoint in the cultures and the communities. And it's really important for the people putting this document together that this document properly encapsulates that variability and properly represents the region. So one further effort we're making, in addition to, of course, the chapter authors are involved throughout the region, and the steering committee has representatives from throughout the region that will help with that. But one further effort that we're doing is we're putting together some community profiles for each of the 33 communities included in the region. And these are going to be essentially 1 to 2 page descriptions of the communities. And before I go any further, I should say they may not be included in their entirety in the document, but they will be used as references for the authors, for the editors, for whoever's involved in the creation of this document. And so I'll describe what actually is going into these profiles and who's writing it. But first I'll say, these are 1 to 2 page snapshots of the community. And what we want to get in there is, of course, the hard information. Remember, this is a marine environment overview, so we're going to try and get the population, the language, the marine infrastructure, harvesting. What are the key plants and animals and other species that are particularly important to each community? Are there any particular geographic locations that are important to the community? But in addition to that, we really want to make sure that we get the sense of place of the community. We establish the intangible elements of the community in these profiles, so the history, the culture. And so how we're going about doing that is, after a lot of back and forth with advisors and the steering committee, we realized that people are very busy, so we've got, our group is drafting these profiles, and then what we're trying to do is establish contacts with representatives from every community and have these profiles pretty thoroughly vetted and get feedback from community members as to whether we accurately represented their community or as accurately as possible within a 1 to 2 page document. And we're at varying stages on these 33 profiles. Some of them have been written and reviewed by community members and are essentially complete. Others are still in the writing phase. And I think that's all I need to say about that, and we can begin to, well, I guess at the bottom you'll see on the slide, it emphasized that we are trying to get in touch with people from every community. This has obvious challenges. So if you get an email from us, you know, from random Jonathan Andrews at the University of Manitoba, that's me. And this is the effort I'm trying to get in touch with you about. We are keen to have meaningful contact with everybody to make sure we accurately represent each community. And this is a great forum for that. So we're pretty much done with the presentation stage, and we'd like to open up the floor. While everyone was away at lunch, we distributed pieces of paper, so you should see pieces of paper with ArcticNet headers at the top in front of you. And we're really keen. We're going to open up the floor for people to discuss, but in general, we would love if you would like to give us feedback on your community about the IRIS document in general. We would love to have your contact information and your name. And we're also looking for whatever guidance you would like to give us on this IRIS document. The example documents are still making their way around the room. So we've got one textbook there on the left side and the others here. So hopefully they'll get around, but if not, come and find us so you can come and see it. But yeah, if you'd be willing to fill out this piece of paper with whatever information you'd like to put on there, we'll be collecting those after. And I'll hand over to Zuzu. Is there anything more?
Just a couple of words. So I kind of, once again, kind of given you guys a lot of information here. So I just wanted to bring back to a few points. I think we've heard in the last couple of days, you know, science isn't everything, but there are times when science can be useful to support initiatives at the community level or efforts of regional organizations. And this document, therefore, we want this document to be as useful for those purposes as we can make it. You know, the focus is on trying to describe the current state of the environment and how it's been impacted, and to the extent that we can say, you know, how might it be impacted in the future. So the hope is that we could then learn from these various impacts, and that might then help us, you know, when there are future developments ongoing, maybe we can learn a little bit from the past, and this could be used to help shape the nature of some of those future developments. But again, we really hope that we want to try to make this document as useful as we can, and so any advice that you guys can give us on, you know, from the content of it, what are key topics, issues, what matters of emphasis and things that need to be focused on. I feel like we've really learned a lot in the last couple of days. It's been incredibly helpful to be here and to hear everything that's been said up to now. The direction in which these, you know, the recommendations should be taken, all that input would be really, really helpful. So whether you choose to jot it down on the paper that was circulated around, I know not everyone likes to speak into a microphone, or now if anyone will provide comments back, you know, by talking to us now, I just want to open up the floor to you. So thank you.
Thank you again for the information. I just want to add a little bit of climate change. When they wanted to build the ground, one of the elders told me that now, though that elder has passed away, that the lake that they are going to produce is going to help the change of the weather around the world. And it has done that, helping, not the main purpose, but it helps the weather change, part of the weather change. And we can see that today. Someone said that they want to erase LG2, kind of, I think it was another word, but it would help the weather to get back a little bit, I think, if they close the LG2. But that's just a thought. And yeah, I would like to say a lot of things, but I'm just going to stop there right now. Thank you.
Yeah?
Thank you. Few points on your presentation regarding the mercury and the contaminants that just sink at the bottom of the ocean bed. But the problem doesn't end just there, because the species still rely on bottom food. For example, mussels, scallops, and then mussels are eaten by eider ducks. So even if they're at the bottom, they're still a health threat. The animals we eat still are still exposed to them. And another transportation route for the ships going from Churchill to Hudson Strait area, these ship routes, they damage the ice, and then when the ice is damaged, it affects the ice condition. The high and low tide from Atlantic Ocean has a big effect on Hudson Bay. The water comes in with the high tide and comes out in the low tide, and therefore the ice nearby the route is damaged and taken out in the Hudson Strait area. And if that happens, someone will start crying about climate change, and but actually it's the industrial activity going on, and we don't have to blame the climate change for that. It's somebody who is actually doing it. And as for Arctic char, our Arctic chars are diminishing more and more further northward. There are hardly any more Arctic chars in south of our community. And as for consulting the people in the community, I want to stress out that there's a big gap between the consultants. I know the consultants are paid $500 or $1,000 a day for them to do their job while they are collecting some data. But when the elders are asked for their input, they are measly paid $80 or $150 for their participation. There's a big gap in paying all the consultants with the valuable data being collected. The elders give out a very valuable information that is relevant to know what the whole situation is all about. So there should be some corrections in collecting data. They should be paid equally, in my opinion, because these data are important for everyone involved. Thank you.
You see my, oops, you see my trail there? Yeah, I see your trail. Right there.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Those are really good points. That was a lot, and we were all kind of madly scribbling here, so we might try to talk to you a little bit further afterwards. But yeah, both your sort of the knowledge you are contributing here, and the comment about honorariums are good points to find ways to incorporate into this. Thanks.
Anybody else?
I think one big challenge in this task, or something that has become really stuck in my mind as we get into it, is about how there have been so many different activities that it is really a hard task to separate impacts of one thing from impacts of another. So as you referred to there with shipping, if ice is broken, if icebreakers are going through and break, the impact of that versus climate change. And same thing, the task of trying to tease apart how the freshwater has changed because of hydroelectric activities versus because of climate change. There are places where I think that distinction might be obvious, and then other places in Hudson Bay, as you get further from the river mouths themselves, where it becomes harder to be sure about what's going on and what the source of that freshwater might be. So it's a complicated job, and I don't think this document's going to have all the answers by any means. But it's hopefully going to put into one place, this is what we think we know, and also then this is what we don't know and we think is really important to find out in the future.
This is called Richmond Road. You call here Hudson Bay Company?
Yeah.
You talk to me on that company. How do I call?
Thank you very much. I have a question on the shipping route at Queen and also Churchill. Do you know, or anybody know, that the ship goes back and forth how many times a year? Or because I've seen some mammals or animals around Belch Islands that I never seen before. Maybe because of a ship going back and forth, maybe they are scared by the ship. So my question is, do anybody knows how many times a ship going back and forth? Thank you very much.
I'll answer that because I'm taking part in the transportation chapter, and in the transportation chapter we'll be including some new data that people have been putting together on the amount of transportation happening in this region right now. The data set is based on the record that the Canadian Coast Guard keeps, and that data set is getting stronger as time goes on and vessels are reporting more often. And it's data that has not really been out yet, so that will be one of the newer things available in this document, and we hope to be able to provide pretty clear coverage of just how much shipping is taking place in this region.
I snake go fishing. I went all around.
I was just going to say that I think a big challenge here has been that information answers to important questions like that have been hard to get at. You know, the information's been scattered around in lots of different places. And really, I think one of the most useful things about this document is to try to get all these key pieces of information into one place. So whether it's Churchill that's of interest or say Chesterfield Inlet, but you know, so you could go to one document and say, okay, this is how often the ships go past Chesterfield Inlet over a year right now under current conditions, rather than, you know, the effort to find all that information is otherwise too exhausting, I think. So that's one thing I think could be really useful in this document. So as long as we think of, or people tell us what, you know, what are these really key things to get written down in here, these key pieces of information to gather from all these different places and get them into one place. That's what we're trying to do, anyway.
Your question, I just wanted to mention this document, as Lauren said, will be on a website that is being updated as we go throughout. So what is ready is going online as quickly as possible. It also, of course, gets put into these textbook forms you see there, which are available upon request. So the goal is to have them be as accessible as possible. So to go ahead with your question.
And the size, the Egyptian.
I have a question. Maybe not a very good question. And why in our land, why is our land the only place where they're doing lots of research? It's where we live. And there are so many kinds of different research things going on for elders, and there's also people asking for more research. And if you want to get full truth in this research, because what has happened before with similar researches, like there was a Chinese or a Japanese in Innsbruck who did research with a university, and he was doing something for his graduation, and he was paying each individual $20 each, and the elders, for the elders, one time I had to go through the radio that what they are sharing, this valuable information, they are being paid only $20, and with no proper translation, maybe they didn't get proper information from the people they were asking. And if you want true research results, always pay everybody equally as everybody else, not just take what they have. Always go back to those who had given you the information from their heart. I just thought of it right now, because all the time the Inuit, we've been used, let's say ever since the Hudson's Bay Company started working with us up to today, there's always people from the outside telling us what our land is like. And here it is again. It's here again. So if you want proper information, get proper information from the communities, go to them and get back to them.
Thank you for those points. Those are good points. You know, in this big task where, we're not doing new research, and we're trying to put into one place some kind of a summary of that research that has been done, so that it wasn't wasted time and energy for everybody who was involved. But I think maybe one of the important recommendations that might come out of this is about how research in the region should be done differently in the next 20, 30 years from how it's been done in the last 10, 20, 30 years. So that itself is, I think, would be a very useful thing to try to get into the synthesis and key findings of this report. Because I hear what you're saying about the research hasn't always been done, for sure, with in the right way, with involving community partners in the right way. I hear what you're saying. So that's a real point that we need to make sure comes across. Because again, this document will probably get read by the groups, the federal government, and the groups that fund science in different regions. So it's an important message, absolutely. Thank you. So thanks again, everybody, for listening and providing some input. And if you have jotted anything down on paper that you're willing to share with us, we really appreciate it, and we'll come and gather them all up. Or again, if you want to talk one-on-one with one of us, that would be great. Thanks.